For anybody watching this who hasn't yet seen my video, How Anime Characters Think, allow me to introduce you to my neurotyping chart. This is my attempt to classify the ways that people think based on essentially different brain schema that affect the way that people interpret and understand information, the way that they are able to communicate information. I classified that into different categories based on how linear someone's thinking is and how lexical someone's thinking is. Being linear means that you basically have one continuous train of thought. You are always caught up in the current moment. You're not really paying attention to or thinking about multiple things at the same time. You are very much, unitask minded in the thing that you are doing. Whereas more lateral thinkers will tend to be thinking about more than one thing at the same time. Their thoughts tend to feel more like a cloud than a chain of thoughts. Like there are all these different ideas kind of floating around in your head at the same time. And as a result, it is more difficult to place yourself within a current moment. You don't feel as connected to your body. You don't feel as connected to the here and now, the events happening around you. You might have less of a reaction to the things happening around you because you are so pulled back, thinking about so many other things. Or if you are taking in an event with all of your attention, then you're thinking about it in lots of different ways at once, and it can be confusing to even figure out how to feel with all of that going on. Now, if you are a more lexical thinker, it means that you understand things best through words. You are capable of explaining things pretty easily. If somebody asked you to explain yourself, you would give them an explanation pretty quickly. You would know exactly what to say, essentially. Because you feel as though the world operates under a clear set of rules and that there is a right way to be, that there is a correct frame of speech that you could use, and you know what it is. And if you don't know what it is, you wouldn't use it. You wouldn't communicate in terms you don't understand. You would just say that you don't know or that it's something that can't be known. So the more impressionistic your thoughts are, the less verbally coherent they are. You might understand something but really struggle to put it into words. You're constantly rephrasing it. You encircle an idea for a long time before you get into the heart of the idea. And so you might be accused of repeating yourself, accused of, essentially taking too long to get to the point, stuttering, saying lots of ums and uhs on your way there. So there are also lots of people who I think, regardless of the way that they actually think, there is a way of thinking that they sort of admire or that they most want to be like, and you can train yourself to find ways to either, try to behave more like somebody who thinks a different way, or you might be able to take a different approach towards understanding things through words. I think there's anybody who is a human being operating within society is going to have to learn to use words to some extent, or else you will be incomprehensible to most people. And the more lateral your thinking is, the harder it is for others to comprehend you, because of the fact that you will have developed a very particular worldview through the very large amount of data that you're holding within your brain at any given time and using as a frame of reference for exploring the world. So I think that lateral thinkers, because they are so pulled back, because they are so much more fixated on details and all the minutia of the world, they tend to come off as more robotic to outside, observers. But there are people who are more robotic in a more lexical kind of way. People who, maybe are great at doing coding and stuff like that, because of the fact that they can literally memorize large strings of numbers and literally remember where they typed what within that string. Whereas somebody who might be good at code while being an impressionist is somebody who wouldn't be able to literally describe the code, but through looking at it could get a grasp of it just by seeing the whole thing and just understanding how code works, what the formulas are, through having observed it. So people who are more visual learners, who are more audio learners, people who learn through metaphor, through abstraction, through art, more so than through having things literally explained to them. Those would be impressionistic thinkers. People who are more lexical are more likely to get things just from having it explained as straightforwardly as possible. If you use unclear terms, they will have a harder time understanding it because they won't get the gist of it just from hearing it. They have to have it laid out before they really understand what's going on. So I think that, more lateral thinkers will try to process bigger ideas in general. They will have more of a sense of meta-narrative, of a meta-scope. They're interested in how very different things connect to one another. Whereas somebody who's more linear will be more concerned about the experience of the current moment and maximizing that. And people can be high and low IQ all over this spectrum. In the last video that I did, I put a lot of fixation on IQ unintentionally. It wasn't really meant to be a major focus of the video. I kind of tacked it on last minute because the main point of this chart is the linear versus lexical thinking. The main reason I used IQ in the previous chart was just simply to show that high and low IQ had nothing to do with what category you fall into. It's true that more lateral thinkers have a higher opportunity to have a higher IQ because they can process more simultaneous thoughts, but this doesn't automatically mean that they are definitionally higher IQ. You can have a low IQ and be a lateral thinker, as most people diagnosed with autism would fall into that category. The reason that they usually receive that diagnosis is that they cannot manage the lateral thoughts happening in their brain. The way I was using IQ in my video was regarding it as a combination of problem-solving ability and adaptability. So your ability to take your thinking and adapt it to new situations and develop an understanding of how to manage that situation is indicative of your IQ. So lots of people who might be diagnosed with autism when they are children, but grow up and learn to communicate, learn to be able to, act like a normal person, essentially. That would be like people who are very lateral thinkers, but with higher IQ. And so, anybody in any of these categories could be higher or lower IQ. I also want to communicate that they can have any kind of personality type, and that's why I've made some major changes to the chart here. You may remember, if you watched the original video, that there were a bunch of categories that had different names, which I've now changed. So the middle managers were changed to bookkeepers, as per the suggestion of a middle manager who himself wrote, or of a bookkeeper rather, who wrote a long-ass analysis of why the name should be changed. I agreed with it and changed it. I changed brooders to contemplative. We have changed the reasonable people to level-headed. The caretakers have become understanding. The shadow guardians became overseers, and room brighteners became externalists. And the reason for all of this is that I wanted it to be very, very clear that these are not roles. These are not roles that you fulfill in society. These are not personalities. These are ways of thinking. And that is the number one most important thing for everybody to understand here. And I think that a lot of the terms that I had on there before, people would debate with themselves, like, am I more of a shadow guardian or a room brightener? And it's like, well, worry about how lateral you are and how linear you are, not what title fits you better, because the titles are meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So, it may be that, for me, it was hard to not use terms like caretaker when every time anime portrays this type of character, they portray them as a caretaker. But the question is, what is it about their thinking that makes them a caretaker? It's that they're very understanding because they can understand people in lots of different categories, and their minds are a bit more organized so they can process that better. People who are in the bottom left category all have these kind of traits. But Whereas contemplative people and bookkeepers, technicians, human calculators can literally be so lexical that it actually makes it very difficult for them to communicate because of the fact that the things that they say are constantly having implications attached to them by more impressionistic thinkers. Somebody pointed that out to me, and I heavily agree. As a more lexical thinker myself, I'm constantly angry at people for reading more into what I say than what I said, because I choose my words very carefully to mean exactly what I mean. And I think that to people who are more impressionistic thinkers, they think like, they see that as, oh, well, you had the other impression, but you said this thing, you changed it. It wasn't your instinctual reaction, because they value that instinctual reaction as the way they think and the way they understand. Whereas somebody who's more lexical sees the instinctual reaction as not true to themselves. They see that as they see that as the version of them that didn't understand yet. And the version of them that's had time to process that information and turn it into words is the version that has the understanding. Whereas the impressionist is trying to use the words to approach the original understanding they already had. So I think that's the chief difference between these types of thinkers is, you've got the people who are in the more lexical category are the ones who are seeing this information, getting kind of a gist of it, but not really being able to internalize the information until they verbalize it. Whereas an impressionistic thinker might be harboring an impression for a long time before they figure out how to put it into words. And, for someone like me, when I have any kind of impression, it turns into words immediately because, I'm best at explaining. Or if I do harbor an impression for a while, it'll just sit there in the very back of my mind, waiting and waiting and waiting until the day I can finally put words to it. But, the hardest things for me to put words to are aesthetics. I've always had the most difficulty writing my videos that are about aesthetics, but it seems like those are a lot of my most appreciated videos because people who are aestheticians can't explain aesthetics at all. So the fact that I'm even trying seems to be, a big thumbs up in their book, but I don't actually have the understanding of like how to recreate interesting aesthetics. My aesthetic style is just slapdash. Anything with colors is cool, So it's interesting to see the different reactions people have had to this chart, understanding more the different reasons that people come to my content, sort of realizing that all this time I've been thinking that I was talking to fellow lexical thinkers and trying to convince them that I was right, and constantly failing because of the fact that these lexical thinkers want me to be even more scientific. And I always saw it as like, they treat me like I'm like super unreasonable. And so I had, kind of thought of myself as less of a lexical thinker for that reason, when the reality is that it's more like I'm just to the side of that. And like most people are much further to the other end, and those are the people who really like my content because I am giving words to things that they understand without having words to express. So, I think that the bulk of my audience is lateral thinkers who are more on the impressionistic side than myself. Whereas I think that people who are more lexical than me get less out of my content because they see it as just less scientific or accurate, So yeah, I changed the typings for some of the stuff. So, I'm not going to remake all the anime neuro cards. Somebody else could do that if they want to. I could give you the Photoshop document, I guess. But all you have to do is use Blue Highway font and you can correct them all. But because I did put the blanks of each color in its respective section, or you can make your own. Mine look like shit. So as you can see here, I had changed my chart. I'm gonna go ahead and do this PCP one. So anybody who follows me and my friends in the PCP, I'll break this down, and maybe this will help you to understand. So we'll just go from the top down, starting with Devu, who I put into the new types category. Devu is someone who, when he tries to explain something, encircles the point continuously for a long time, sharing impressionistic, very imprecise terms, trying to zero in on something, trying to slowly navigate towards the point he's trying to make, but never quite feeling like he made it all the way there, and therefore feeling the need to continually re-explain again and again. This is because his thinking is extremely impressionistic, as you can see in the types of art that he enjoys and the games that he designs and things like that. He is very, very, very much an aesthetic thinker. Munchie, similarly, one of the traits that you'll notice in these people is people who are more impressionistic is they will change their minds much more often. They will drop what they're saying in the middle of it, lose interest in the point they're making, feel as though the words aren't good enough, or they might even express themselves in such a way where it seems as though they actively hate the words coming out of their mouth, like speaking disgusts them. And with Munchie, you can see the highly lateral version of that, which is to just belt through your words, to just be trying to get rid of them as fast as possible and make up new ones to take their place. With Hippo, it's not quite as lateral, but there is still that element of him, throwing away what he's saying, discarding this thought because it's not close enough to his impression. He knows he understands. He thinks you should understand, and it shouldn't take this many words. You should already get the point based on the few he's said, and he's ready to move on. I put Mage into a similar category, someone who seems to sort of feel defeated by her own words some of the time. So that takes care of the more impressionistic thinkers on the far end. Jesse, I would also consider to be a very impressionistic thinker, somebody who expects other people to get it, somebody who feels, aggravated by the need to have to explain things that seem basic, but that are mostly things that lexical thinkers get caught up on. People who need things to be literal, who can't parse the aesthetic elements of the video, and therefore get kind of lost in it, And for someone like him, he has learned to be hyper-lexical in order to explain himself. So, he has a mastery of language, but the way that he uses language is very aesthetic. He writes poetically, he uses lots of just like fun wordplay, he's constantly twisting his sentences around because he wants them to have more of an aesthetic feel to them. Ben Saint is similar. He is somebody who is not as good at making a coherent argument per se, but he can express something in a sort of fantastical way. He can tell stories, he can use metaphors, he can use imagery to make people understand bigger concepts. In fact, he's quite good at capturing a lot of concept in just a little bit of, detail. So, I would say that he is, in the externalists category, formerly known as room brighteners, but neighboring on the other stuff. I myself consider myself to be very lateral and pretty lexical. Obviously, I have, an imaginative side. I have a side and I'm obsessed with aesthetics. I am in love with aesthetics. I want to better understand, to indulge in aesthetics. I think aesthetic thinkers are cool, and like more lexical thinking than my own drives me insane. So like, it probably seems like, if you consume my content is obviously extremely lexical, but like that comes naturally to me. There's no struggle. There's no difficulty writing my scripts. They come out of flow state. So, it's pretty easy for me to do that kind of writing. People who I put down into more of the slightly more linear and slightly more lexical categories. Nate obviously is the most lexical person probably that I know. Very much somebody who thinks in terms of rule sets, who wants to have very clearly understood parameters for everything. Like myself, he is obviously somebody who indulges with impressionistic ideas, but he really needs to break them down lexically in order to feel anything about them. Like, he doesn't care about elements of a piece that he does not have a lexical connection to, and he is still pretty lateral of a thinker. Tom, I put more in the understanding category. He's somebody who I think does consider there to be rules and to be like a way that the world is understood, that he more or less like tries to follow, but he also understands that there is this gray area, this more impressionistic side. He has some attunement to it, even if he doesn't necessarily think in more impressionistic terms, which is why something like 3D modeling is so good for him, because it's something that is more of a technician kind of, thought process behind it while still being an aesthetic trade. Mumkey Jones and Mother's Basement I put on here as well, former PCP members, just because I wanted to sort of signify, like, I do think Mumkey is somebody who is a bit less lateral than the rest of the PCP for the most part, but also very lexical, in that he very much thinks of the world in terms of rules that are in place, and that breaking the rules is what is sort of funny, whereas Mother's Basement, I put down straight in the bookkeeper's category. Definitely very linear. If you've ever talked to him on a podcast, he's not somebody who can be interrupted and remember what he was talking about. And therefore, really hates to have his train of thought broken. But also, fairly lexical. He also is somebody who very much talks about things in terms of like the rules as they stand. He might even be more lexical than I placed him. I think maybe he tries to put on a character of being less lexical than he is, because he's trying to seem like a kooky fun guy, and his idea of a kooky fun guy is like slightly impressionist, but that's just what I got out of the interactions I've had with him. So, if this helps you to understand, if you're a fan of the PCP, hopefully that helps. I also did one for the Dick Show. If you're a fan of the Dick Show, I'm not going to go into this. I'll probably go on the Dick Show to talk about it if Dick is interested, because he did watch this, and he retweeted my stuff about it, and so did Moon Cult here and Harmful Opinion. So I think they are more or less okay with their placement on the list. But yeah, if you're a fan of the Dick Show, go check that out. But yeah, I've been nonstop discussing this video since it came out. Like, my Discord has been constantly talking about it, constantly discussing these things. They helped me to rename these categories. Carla built what I consider the current standard version of the chart. I wanted to show that the way that this chart, that I want you to use it, like with the PCP heads, obviously I made them quite big. They're not occupying just one point on the chart. They're kind of in an area, because I really wanted to communicate the idea that, like, nobody is probably going to be just one of these things unless they're square in the middle of it. But, like, more likely they're somewhere nebulously in one of these areas, So I kind of wanted to put everybody over like 4 to 6 blocks, so you got the sense of like, or 4 to 9 I meant to say 6 to 9 blocks. 6 to 9 blocks to kind of indicate where they generally sit. So that's the way I'd encourage you to use the chart. That's why I like this version of the chart. And yeah, I'm going to make a shit ton of videos about this. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to do a live stream with May on the Corrupting Your Kids channel, where she has been doing live streams pretty regularly. She's planning to do them even more regularly once the school semester is over, I think. So, make sure you're subscribed to that channel. But we're going to be live streaming, and I'm going to neurotype YouTubers. It's just going to be me and whoever else is on the podcast, the live stream rather, just discussing the neurotypes of as many YouTubers as we feel like. So that'll probably be a ton of fun. I might even end up uploading it to this channel after it's complete, if it is really fun, as my official like YouTuber neurotyping, video. But I'm also going to do them for specific shows, different genres. I want to talk about things like how flow states manifest in each neurotype, how sociopathy manifests in each neurotype, because both of those are things that can be applied to all of them. So, if there were a y-axis, I also am considering the possibility that it may be that each person should actually have 2 dots on the map, that you should have the lateral versus linear impressionist dot and the lateral versus linear lexical dot, and that both of those maybe are different levels of lexical or linear. And maybe that has to do with where autism and dyslexia come in, because if you couldn't tell, lateral means autism. Anybody who's on the lateral side of the chart would be diagnosable with autism if it was detected, if they were considered to have it, or ADHD or something like that. But like the more lateral, the more autistic, the more impressionist, the more dyslexic. That is essentially what this is. So I forgot to mention, I also created a Reddit board called r/neurotyping, specifically so you could go and create threads for any anime character, any character in anything, any internet personality, any characters at all, debate their neurotypes. I want us to, as a community, come to actual decisions. Like, I want us to have final decisions about each character's neurotyping, so that we can eventually plot a gigantic graph of every character ever and all agree on it. Hopefully all of that's clear. And thanks again for watching. Come to tomorrow's stream, donate via PayPal, and I'll see you in the next one.